17 years ago, they called her father a traitor. They stripped her name. They buried her family. Tonight, the Alpha King speaks it aloud. In the Wolf Kingdom of Viridian, 100 noble daughters gather for the royal mating ceremony. Silk gowns, sacred bloodlines, ancient law. Only one woman writes their names into the registry, a quiet scribe with ink-stained fingers and a forbidden surname. The chief steward wants her silenced. Her mother is chained in a hidden manor. Her brother has never seen the sun. The Alpha King has watched her for 14 months. He has never touched her. He will not until she says his name. A forged confession, a blood oath broken, wolves circling the border, a rival Luna smiling, guards on the mountain road, a mate bond glowing beneath moonlight, a crown about to fall. Add her. That is not a request. 7 days. That was the deadline Evelyn Ashford had been given. 7 days to finish transcribing the selection registry before the choosing ceremony. 7 days to record every name, every lineage, every bloodline verification of every eligible woman across the lowland territories of Viridian. 7 days to write, in her own careful hand, the name of the future queen into a ledger that would sit in the palace archives for centuries. She would not be writing her own. She knew this, the way she knew the weight of her pen. The exact slant of afternoon light through the arched windows of the records hall, the precise number of steps from her desk to the ink stores and back. She knew it the way she knew her own surname. The one she wrote small and quick whenever a document required it. As though making the letters smaller might make the history behind them quieter. Ashford, a name that had once opened every door in the lowlands. A name that now opened nothing. She dipped her pen. She kept writing. The records hall of Viridian Palace sat at the eastern end of the ground floor. A long stone room with arched windows and shelves that climbed floor to ceiling on 3 walls. It smelled of old paper, binding glue, the faint iron tang of ink. Aveline had worked here for 14 months. She had been hired by the chief steward, a man named Cassius Blackthorn, who had looked at her ink samples and her references from the border monastery where she had trained, and had asked no questions about her family. She had been grateful for that. Grateful enough to keep her head down, her opinions locked behind her teeth, her work clean and quiet, 'cause silence was the one thing Evelyn Ashford was truly good at. She had been practicing it her entire life. Have you ever watched an honorable name be dragged through the mud and wondered how long the truth can stay buried before someone finally finds it? Aveline had wondered every single day. For 17 years, the door to the records hall opened. Marguerite Vale slipped inside carrying 2 clay cups of broth. She set one on the corner of Aveline's desk without ceremony. You missed the noon meal again. I ate. You ate a heel of bread 4 hours ago. I watched you. Aveline took the cup without looking up. Marguerite was the other scribe on the palace staff. A round-faced woman with clever hands and a tendency to mother anyone who held still long enough. She had claimed the desk across from Aveline's on her first day, and she had never moved. The selection registry has to be complete by tomorrow evening. Cassius wants it bound and presented to the king before the formal announcement. And you have how many names left? 43, Marguerite whistled low. 43 bloodline verifications in one afternoon. He's trying to bury you. He's trying to get the work done. He's trying to bury you, because you're the only person in this palace who could do it properly. And that irritates him. She settled into her chair, pulled her own stack of correspondence toward her. Have you seen the candidates list? Aveline's pen did not falter. I compiled it. Then you know Lady Isolde Ravencrest is at the top. The registry is alphabetical. Aveline, she looked up. Marguerite was watching her with the particular expression she wore when she wanted to say something she knew would not welcome. What? Nothing. Drink the broth before it goes cold. Aveline drank the broth. It was good, rich with marrow and herbs. She thought about nothing except the warmth of it in her chest and the 43 names that still needed her attention. She did not think about the king. She did not think about the way the records hall went sharp and bright whenever he walked past the open door, the way her vision focused to an almost painful clarity on the exact shade of his hair, the precise line of his jaw, the way his hands moved when he spoke. Because thinking about that would be foolish, and Aveline Ashford could not afford to be foolish. She had been foolish once, years ago, when she had believed that being good at something would be enough to protect her. That keeping her family's name clean through her own conduct would eventually undo what had been done to it. That someone, somewhere, would look at the treason charges leveled against House Ashford and see the cracks, the convenient timing, the way their lands had been absorbed into a neighboring lord's holdings within a month of the verdict, No one had looked. No one had cared. So she had stopped being foolish. She had taken her training and her penmanship and her silence. And she had built a life small enough to fit inside a records hall, where no one asked questions. It was not a large life, but it was hers. And it did not require anyone to see her. The afternoon passed, 18 names, 23:30. Her hand cramped. She shook it out. She kept writing. The light shifted from gold to amber to the long blue shadows of late afternoon. Margaret left at the evening bell. She pressed Aveline's shoulder as she passed. Go to bed at some point. The selection will still be there tomorrow. Aveline nodded. She did not go to bed. She finished the 43rd name at an hour so late the corridor torches had burned to stubs. Her fingers cramped again, her eyes burned. The registry was complete. 112 names verified, annotated, and ready for binding. Her own name was not among them. She cleaned her pen, sealed her ink, covered the registry with a cloth, and as she turned toward the door, she stopped. He was there. Caitlin Draven stood in the corridor just beyond the records hall entrance. One hand rested on the stone doorframe as though he had been about to knock, and then had not. His chestnut hair fell loose past his shoulders, unbound from whatever tie had held it during the day. The silver circlet he wore at formal functions was absent. He was in his shirt sleeves, the white linen rumpled, the green leather doublet missing. He looked, Aveline thought with a shock that traveled from her stomach to her fingertips, like a man who had not been sleeping. You're still here. The registry is finished, Your Majesty. I wasn't asking about the registry. Her breath caught. The room went sharp around him. She could see the individual threads in his shirt, the faint shadow beneath his jaw where he had not shaved, the silver flecks in his grey eyes that she had never noticed in daylight. I was just leaving, he nodded. He did not move from the doorway. Aveline, a name in his voice. She hated how it sounded, warm and certain, as though he had been saying it to himself for months, and had only now decided to say it aloud. Your Majesty, Caitlin, I can't call you that. You can when we're alone, she looked at him, and the pull between them tightened. She could see his pulse beating in the hollow of his throat. Steady, aimed at her. We shouldn't be alone. She walked past him into the corridor. She did not look back. Her fingers were trembling the entire way to her quarters. She pressed her back against her closed door. She breathed until the trembling stopped. 7 days. The choosing ceremony was in 7 days. He would select a queen from the registry she had just finished writing. A woman with a noble house, an unbroken lineage, a name that did not make people flinch. Aveline pressed her palms flat against the door. She told herself that the sharpness in her vision when he stood near was a trick of exhaustion, a symptom of too many late nights, nothing more. She almost believed it. But what no one in Viridian Palace knew was that 17 years ago, a little girl 7 had watched her father walk into a prison cell and had made herself a promise. That one day she would clear his name, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost. That girl was still inside her, waiting. The formal announcement came the following morning. Cassius Blackthorne stood at the front of the great hall and read the selection decree in his careful, measured voice. He was a tall man, lean and precise. Amber eyes that tracked every movement in the room the way a hawk tracks a field mouse. His dark brown coat was immaculate. The silver chain of office gleamed at his chest. His black gloves folded over one another as he held the decree. By the authority of this court and the traditions of the Draven line, the following women are entered into the selection for the position of queen and mate to His Majesty, King Caitlin Draven. He began reading names. The great hall was full, packed with courtiers, nobles, visiting families. Palace staff pressed against the back wall. Aveline stood with Marguerite near the service entrance, her hands clasped behind her back, her face neutral, Lady Isald Ravencrest of the Eastern Vale. A murmur of approval rippled through the hall. Aveline watched a tall woman with golden hair and an emerald silk gown incline her head with practiced grace. Politically perfect, genetically impeccable. The kind of woman whose name had been first on every list for a decade. The names continued. 20, 30, 40. Daughters of lords and generals. Alpha's granddaughters. Women whose bloodlines stretched back centuries without a single blemish. Aveline listened and felt nothing. That concludes the formal registry, Cassius said, rolling the decree. The selection period will span 7 days, culminating in the choosing ceremony at moonrise on the 7th night. All candidates will be housed in the eastern wing and will have scheduled audiences with His Majesty. He began to step down from the platform. One moment, the voice came from the high seat. Caitlin had been sitting so still through the reading that Aveline had forced herself not to look at him. Now he leaned forward, his eyes scanned the hall. Evelyn felt her vision sharpen against her will. He was looking toward the service entrance, toward the back wall where the staff stood, toward the exact spot where she was standing with her hands clasped and her face carefully empty. "The registry is incomplete." Cassius turned. "Your Majesty?" "There is a name missing." A rustle of confusion moved through the hall. Cassius's expression did not change, but Aveline saw his gloved fingers tighten on the decree. "The registry was compiled according to the eligibility requirements, Your Majesty. Noble birth, verified bloodline, unmated status. Every qualifying woman in the lowland territories has been included." "Not everyone." Kaelin stood. The hall went quiet in the way that halls go quiet when the most powerful person in the room decides to use that power. Aveline Ashford. The silence became absolute. Aveline felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Every head in the great hall turned toward the service entrance. 100 faces, 200 eyes, all finding her against the back wall in her dove-gray bodice, and her ink-stained fingers, and her worn leather boots that had no business being on the same floor as Isolde Ravencrest's silk slippers. Add her. Cassius's amber eyes found Aveline across the hall. She watched something move behind them. Something calculating, something cold. Before his expression smoothed. "Your Majesty, Miss Ashford is a member of the palace staff, a scribe. She does not meet the eligibility requirements. She is of noble birth." Another ripple through the crowd. Evelyn heard someone to her left whisper, "Ashford, wasn't that the family?" "The Ashford title was stripped," Cassius said. "The family was convicted of treasons and against crown. She is, with respect, not eligible. She's not even in the selection," a voice said from somewhere in the crowd, loud enough to carry. It was followed by a scatter of low, agreeing sounds. Kaelin looked at the crowd, then he looked at Cassius, then he looked at Aveline, and his gaze locked onto her across 50 feet of crowded stone. She could see every shade of gray in his eyes. "The iron, the silver, the storm, add her," he said again. "That is not a request." Marguerite's hand found Aveline's arm and gripped hard enough to bruise. Aveline stood very still. She breathed through the roaring in her ears and she thought very clearly, "This is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me." The hall erupted into noise. Cassius closed the registry with a snap and descended from the platform. The courtiers surged into clusters of whispered conversation. Aveline saw Isolde Ravencrest watching her from across the hall with an expression that was not hostile, but intensely clinically curious, and Kaelin sat back down in the high seat, and he did not look away from her. She left the hall before anyone could speak to her. She walked through 2 corridors, a covered gallery, the kitchen passage, before she found an empty storeroom and shut the door behind her and pressed her back against a barrel of flour and shook. "Why?" she whispered to the empty room. "Why would you do that?" No answer came. She had not expected one, but she had needed to hear herself say it aloud, to confirm that it was real, that the king of the Dravencourt had just ordered her name added to a selection she had no business being in. In front of every noble in the lowlands, she stayed in the storeroom until the shaking stopped. Then she went back to the records hall, because it was the only place she knew how to be. Marguerite was waiting. I wasn't going to say anything. You were going to say something about fate or the moon or some other thing I can't afford to believe in." Marguerite studied her. "I was going to say that Cassius came by while you were gone. He took the registry. He said he needed to add a name." She paused. "He looked angry. He should be. He just had his king override him in front of the entire court. That's not why he's angry." Aveline sat down at her desk. Her ink was still sealed from last night. The cloth was still draped over the empty space where the registry had been. Marguerite leaned forward. "Aveline, he's angry because you're an Ashford. Because that name means something he doesn't want anyone to remember. It means traitors. It means a family that was destroyed without a trial." Aveline looked at her sharply. Marguerite held her gaze. "My grandmother was from the southern border. She remembered the Ashfords. She said the treason charges never smelled right. Your grandmother was kind. My grandmother was old and had no reason to lie." Aveline pulled a fresh sheet of vellum toward her, uncapped her ink. Her fingers were still now. She had years of practice at making them so. "I have work to do." Marguerite did not push. She returned to her own desk. They worked in silence, and the only sound was the scratch of 2 pens on paper. That night, walking the corridor back to her quarters, Aveline noticed the guard at the far end of the records hall passage. He had been there before. She had seen him 100 times without thanking him, an older man, broad-shouldered, grey at the temples. His armor was plain but well-maintained, his posture straight as a lance. Tonight he did not simply nod as she passed. Tonight his eyes tracked her the entire length of the corridor, and in his eyes was something she had not seen on a soldier's face in 17 years, recognition, and under it something else, grief or gratitude, or both. She stopped. "Do I know you?" "No, my lady. You called me that." Forces of habit, but she studied him. He was easily past 60, perhaps 65. But his frame carried the memory of the man he had been, and his voice, low and rough, carried the accent of the southern border. The place her father had ridden out from 100 times to inspect the patrols. "What's your name?" "Sir Godfrey Hale." "I don't know that name." "You wouldn't," he paused. His hand tightened briefly on the pommel of his sword. Then relaxed. "I served your father, my lady, once. A long time ago." Aveline felt the floor shift again. The same tilt, the same terrible clarity. She had not spoken of her father in 17 years. She had trained herself not to think of him except in the private hours of the night. And here, in a lit corridor of the palace where he had once been welcome, an old knight was saying his name, not his name, but close enough. "You served him under his command. On the southern patrols. He was the finest officer I ever knew. He was convicted of treason, he was." Sir Godfrey did not flinch. He did not look away. His eyes were the color of weathered stone. Steady, he was convicted. That does not mean he was guilty. Aveline could not speak. Her throat had closed. She stood in the corridor with her hands clasped in front of her the way she always clasped them, and she looked at this old man. And she felt 17 years of careful silence begin to crack somewhere deep inside her chest. "I have to go, oh?" "Yes, my lady," she turned. She walked the rest of the way to her quarters without letting her feet run. She closed the door behind her, and she pressed her back against the wood the way she had pressed it against the storeroom barrel. And she breathed. She thought of her father, the specific weight of his hand on her shoulder, the way he used to lift her onto his horse when she was small the last time she had seen him, standing between two guards, in a corridor much like this one, turning back once to look at her, his mouth shaping her name, Aveline, be brave. She had been trying. For 17 years, she had been trying. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed. She thought about the king, about Cassius, about Sir Godfrey, about the way each of them, in the space of 2 days, had looked at her as though they knew something she did not. She thought about the trial documents she had seen once in the border monastery archive when she was 15. She had begged the abbot for permission to read them. He had allowed it. She remembered the strange feeling that had come over her as she studied her father's confession. His signature at the bottom. She had spent every day of her childhood watching him sign documents. She knew his hand the way she knew her own face. The signature on the confession had not been his. She had known. At 15, she had known, and she had told no one. Because who would have believed a scribe's apprentice with a treason-stained surname against the ruling of the High Court? No one. So she had folded the knowledge up and put it away, where it had waited. For 17 years, the candle on her table guttered. She watched it. She thought of Caitlin's voice saying her name, the certainty in it, as though he had been holding the word in his mouth for a very long time. Add her. She did not sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed and watched the candle burn to nothing. And when the first grey light of dawn touched the window, she rose and washed her face and pinned up her hair. She had 6 days until the choosing ceremony. She did not know what was coming. She did not know why the king had spoken her name in front of the court. She did not know what Sir Godfrey had wanted to say in that corridor and had not said. But she knew this. She was tired of being small. She was tired of writing other women's names into a book that would never contain her own. She was tired of pretending that a signature she had recognized as false at 15 was true because a court had said so. She dressed. She fastened her belt. She went to work because that was what she knew how to do, and because the records hall was where the truth had always been kept. Under lock, under seal, under the careful hand of a scribe who had, until now, been afraid to look. Today she would look. The first selection event was scheduled for that evening. A formal audience in the throne room, one candidate at a time. Aveline reported to the eastern wing at the hour Cassius had specified. She was placed at the end of the queue, behind 23 women in silk gowns whose names she had written into the registry herself. She stood in the antechamber. She waited. She listened to the muted sound of laughter and low conversation from the throne room beyond. She watched the women ahead of her disappear one by one through the tall double doors, and return a few minutes later with pink cheeks and bright eyes. Their names now spoken by the king. Isolde Ravencrest was called third. She came back with the same expression she had worn when she entered. Composed, watchful, assessing. She stopped in front of Aveline. He asked about you. He shouldn't have. He asked whether you had reported for the audience. I told him I hadn't seen you yet. Why are you telling me this? Isolde tilted her head. Her blue eyes were precise, cataloging. Because I am not accustomed to competing against someone I cannot read. It is inconvenient. I'm not competing, you are? Whether you meant to be or not, she walked on. Her silk slippers made no sound on the stone. The hours passed. The queue thinned. The sun set beyond the eastern windows. Torches were lit in the antechamber, and at last Aveline's name was called. She walked into the throne room alone, her hands clasped behind her back, her chin level. She kept her eyes on the floor until she was 3 paces from the dais. Then she raised them. Kaelin was seated in the high seat. Cassius stood at his right shoulder. 2 senior council members flanked him at a respectful distance. The room was smaller than it had felt during the announcement. The vaulted ceiling seemed lower, the tapestries closer, the candlelight softer. The pull between them snapped tight the instant her eyes met his, and the room went into that sharpness she was beginning to dread. She could see the pulse in his temple, the precise way his hand rested on the arm of the chair, the tension across his shoulders that no one else in the room would notice. She inclined her head. "Your Majesty, Miss Ashford." Cassius's amber eyes did not leave her. His Majesty will now conduct a brief audience with the candidate. The standard duration is 4 minutes. That is not necessary tonight. Cassius's gloves twitched. "Your Majesty? Leave us." The council members glanced at each other, then bowed and withdrew. Cassius did not move, "Your Majesty. The protocol requires a chief steward be present at all audiences. You wrote the protocol. You can amend it. Leave us." Cassius bowed. It was the shallowest bow Aveline had ever seen a chief steward give a king. He withdrew. The doors closed behind him with a soft, final sound. They were alone. Kaelin did not speak for a long moment. He simply looked at her, and Aveline felt every second of that look as though he were reading her the way she read a document. Slowly, attentively, without missing a single word. "You did not sleep. No, Your Majesty, because of me, because of a great many things. You are among them." His mouth curved. Not quite a smile, something quieter. "You always answer honestly. I don't know how not to." "Yes, you do. You have spent 14 months in this palace answering questions so carefully that no one has learned a single thing about you. That is not honesty."
"There's a difference."
She said nothing. "Do you know why I called your name?" "No." "Your Majesty, would you believe me if I told you?" "Probably not," he laughed. It was quiet, genuine, a sound she had not heard him make before in all the months she had transcribed his council sessions. She had heard him speak with authority, with patience, with the measured warmth of a ruler who knew exactly how much of himself to give. She had never heard him laugh. "Then I will not tell you tonight. I will tell you when you can hear it. That is not your decision to make." "No, it is not." He leaned forward, his forearms braced on his knees. The circlet on his brow caught the candlelight. "I will make you an offer, Miss Ashford. You will attend every event of this selection. You will not withdraw. You will let the court see you. If, at the end of the 7 days, you wish to return to the records hall and never speak of this again, I will honor that wish. I will restore you to your position. You will be paid a stipend for your inconvenience, and I will never again speak your name in a room where you have not given me permission to. And if I refuse to attend, then you refuse. But I hope you will not. Why? Because I have waited a very long time to see you standing where you are standing now. And I would like the chance to look at you in the light." The air hummed between them. She could feel it in her sternum, in the base of her skull, in the tips of her fingers where the ink lived. 14 months, she said. It was not a question. His eyes did not move from her face. Since your 2nd week, she did not know what her face did. But she saw him see it, and she saw the answering shift in his expression. The smallest softening around his mouth, as though he had been braced for something worse than what he had seen. "You should have told me. Would you have believed me?" She had no answer for that, because they both knew what it was. "I will attend the events. Thank you. That is not for you. That is for me. There is something I need to know, then find it out. I will not stand in your way." She turned. She walked to the door. Her hand was on the latch when he spoke again. "Evelyn," she did not turn back. "Yes, Your Majesty. If you need anything, in these 7 days, any door in this palace will open for you. Any archive, any record, any man in my guard. Do not hesitate." She stood with her hand on the latch. She thought of the trial documents in the Border Monastery archive. She thought of the signature that was not her father's. She thought of Sir Godfric Hale's weathered stone eyes. "Any archive, I understand." She walked out of the throne room. Cassius was waiting in the corridor. His face was smooth, his hands folded. His silver chain of office gleaming softly in the torchlight. She walked past him without acknowledgement, and she felt his eyes on her back the entire length of the passage. That night she did not go to her quarters. She went back to the records hall. She lit a single candle. She pulled from the back of the highest shelf a locked wooden box that had been left there by the previous chief archivist. It contained duplicates of every court proceeding of the past 40 years. Copies made for the palace archive. Never yet catalogued, she opened the box. She searched through it. Her fingers were sure. Halfway down the stack, she found what she was looking for. A slim leather-bound file, faded ink on the spine. Crowned House, she sat on her desks. She stared at it for a long time. She thought of her father saying, "Be brave." She thought of the king saying, "Any archive." She thought of the signature at the bottom of a confession she had memorized when she was 15. The one she had known, even then, was false. She opened the file. The candle burned down. The night deepened around her. And Aveline Ashford, for the first time in 17 years, began to look. The file was thicker than she had expected. Court transcripts, witness depositions, chains of custody, property inventories. She arranged them in order across the desk. She anchored the pages with her inkwell and her pen box and a small brass weight shaped like a hound. The confession came first. 2 pages, written on cheap monastery paper. Signed at the bottom in the hand that had once written her nursery rhymes on the flyleaf of a prayer book. The hand she knew better than her own, except it was not that hand. She had thought it before. At 15. She had been uncertain then. A girl in a border monastery with candlelight and a rushing pulse. Tonight she was a scribe of 14 months standing in the palace records hall. Tonight she had trained eyes. Tonight she could name the specific betrayals of the forgery. The descender of the A2 round, where her father's had carried a small hook. The letters declosed too tight, where his had always left a thread of daylight inside. Every letter Alaric Ashford had ever written her had been a small window she could see through. Whoever had forged this confession had not seen those windows, because they had never received a letter. She turned the page, and the room grew very cold. The next document was a property inventory. It listed the seized Ashford lands, the manor, the stables, the orchards, the 3 tenant villages. A separate schedule attached in a different hand recorded the auction dates. Below the auction dates, a purchaser was named, the purchase price. Below that, a notation in the same hand, payment received in full. On account of the Blackthorn estate, Aveline stopped breathing. Blackthorn, she read the name 3 times then. She read it a 4th. Because her mind had rejected it the first 3, which was foolish. Because ink does not lie. Ink is only ever as honest as the hand that puts it down. And this hand had been honest by accident. Whoever had written that ledger had assumed no one would ever cross-reference the auction record with the property schedule, because the 2 documents were filed under different court seals, because the archive was vast, because the last person likely to look was a scribe with no name to defend, except she was that scribe, and she was looking, and the walls of the records hall pressed in on her the way they had never pressed in before. She heard footsteps in the corridor. She closed the file. She slid it under the ledger of restored monastery lands. She rose, she smoothed her skirt. She walked to the door with her candle. She met Sir Godfrey Hale in the passage. "You should be sleeping, my lady. I don't sleep. I know." She looked at him. He had said the last 2 words the way a man says something he has known for a long time, and has been waiting for the right moment to admit. "How do you know?" "I have watched your window since the day you were hired." The corridor tilted again. It had been tilting for 2 days now. She was starting to think it would never level again. "Why?" "Because when your father died, he asked one thing of me. He asked me to find his daughter and to watch over her. Until she was safe, he asked that of you." "In prison, yes. How?" "There was a letter." She stared at him. The candle in her hand wavered. She steadied her wrist. She spoke through a throat that felt made of stone. "What letter?" "Come with me, my lady." He led her not to a private chamber but to the guard station at the corner where the records hall corridor met the west stair. It was a small stone room with a table and a bench and a rack of pikes. He unlocked a chest beneath the table. He drew out a folded packet of oilcloth. He set it on the table between them. He wrote it on the day he died. He gave it to the priest who came to hear his last word says. The priest passed it to me. Because the priest was my brother, and my brother knew who I had served and who I still served. Even if they took his title, Aveline touched the oilcloth. Her fingers left a faint smudge from the ink under her nails. "Why did you not give it to me before?" "Because you were 7 years old, and in the care of the monastery." and I could not reach you without bringing hunters to your door. Because the men who wanted your father dead also wanted his children silent. And because I made your father a second promise. I promised I would put the letter in your hand only when you were ready to do what he asked. And what did he ask? Read it. And decide. She untied the string. She unfolded the cloth. Inside was a single sheet of monastery paper, folded 3 times, sealed with a plain wax disc that had cracked long ago. The ink had faded to the color of old tea, but the hand, she could see the descender of the A, the window inside the D. The way he crossed a T with a small flourish that started from below the line. She could see her father alive on the page, sitting at a plank table. Writing to her, she read. She did not read aloud. She read in the silence of a room with a knight in it, who had watched her window for 14 months. And when she reached the end of the letter, she folded it, and she pressed it to her forehead, the way a scholar presses a difficult text. And she stood very still, until the tears that came from her eyes were finished coming, and then she wiped her face with the sleeve of her grey bodice and turned to Sir Godfrey. He knew who did it. He suspected. He named him. Aldrich Blackthorne, chief investigator. Cassius's predecessor's predecessor. Yes. And Cassius is Aldrich's blood nephew, raised at Aldrich's estate from the age of 9, inherited the Blackthorne holdings on Aldrich's death, which include, as I believe you have discovered, 60% of the former Ashford lands. She looked at him, and in his weathered stone eyes, she saw a man who had been carrying a promise for 17 years, and had at last been permitted to set it down. You have known this, every day, yes, and you have said nothing. I have said nothing to the wrong ears, which is not the same as saying nothing at all. Then to whom did you speak? Sir Godfrey did not answer at once. He looked at the letter in her hand. He looked at the small pouch on her belt where she kept her spare pen. He looked at her steady wrist. I spoke to a young king, 14 months ago, on the day he asked me who the new scribe was, and what her surname might be, and whether it had once meant something. The candle in Aveline's hand wavered. She let it waver this time, because what nobody else in Viridian Palace had understood was that Caelan Draven had not stumbled into a mate bond with a scribe. He had come looking for the last daughter of a man he had been quietly rebuilding for over a year, and he had found her writing his other decrees in her father's hand. He knew before he saw me. He knew about you. He did not know what you were. That, my lady, he learned on the day you walked past his council chamber for the first time, and he could not stop looking at the corridor. You watched that too. I watched everything, my lady. That was the promise. She'd folded the letter into the oilcloth. She tucked it inside her bodice, against her ribs where her second heart had lately taken to beating. I have work to do. Yes, my lady, Sir Godfrey, my lady, thank you. For 17 years you are welcome, my lady. For every hour of them. She returned to the records hall. She did not sleep. She copied out the property inventory in her own hand. She copied the confession. She annotated the forgery. She marked every letter where the forger had failed. She numbered the marks. She built a table of comparisons using the flyleaf of the prayer book her father had signed for her 7th birthday, which she had carried in her satchel for 17 years, and which she had never once shown to anyone, not even Marguerite. By dawn, she had a document, 12 pages, bound with a red ribbon, in the hand of a scribe who had trained at a border monastery and who had, for the first time in her life, permitted her name to appear at the top of a piece of writing that mattered. Aveline Ashford, Palace Scribe, findings in the matter of Crown v. House Ashford. She locked it in her desk. She washed her face at the basin in the corner. She went to the second day's event with dry eyes and a straight back. The second day was a garden walk. The palace grounds were bright with late autumn color. The hedges had been sculpted into low geometric shapes that made the walking paths look like a game board. The candidates moved in pairs, silk brushing silk, voices low, laughter measured. Aveline walked alone. She kept to the outer path near the kitchen garden wall, where the rosemary was thick and the smell was honest. Isolde Ravencrest found her at the rosemary hedge. Again, you look like you haven't slept. I haven't. Are you unwell? I am working. On what? On something that will make your morning very difficult if you stay too close to me. Isolde's blue eyes narrowed, not with offense, with interest. You are warning me off. I am warning you kindly. You do not owe me kindness, I know. Isolde considered her for a long moment. Aveline had to concede extraordinary, not merely beautiful. Composed in a way that suggested she had been raised to make composure look like weather. Something one lived inside without noticing. I withdrew my sponsorship of the Blackthorne petition 3 days ago. Aveline stopped walking. The what? Cassius Blackthorne asked my father to sign a formal petition of grievance, to be presented to the king after the ceremony, concerning the inclusion of an ineligible candidate. My father was inclined to sign. I persuaded him not to. Why? Because I am not accustomed to inheriting other people's ugliness, and because I watched Cassius during the announcement, and I have learned, from a lifetime of dinners, to distrust the color a man's face becomes when he has been publicly disobeyed by a superior. Your father listened to you. My father is a lord of the Eastern Vale, not a fool. He listens when the arithmetic favors listening. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. It was not gratitude. It was closer to recognition. Thank you. You may thank me by winning. I am not competing. That is why you will. Isolde walked on, and Aveline stood at the rosemary hedge in a garden shaped like a game board. And she thought that if she survived the week, she would like, one day, to know that woman better. Under any name they both had left her, the third day was the council observation. The candidates were seated in the gallery above the council chamber, to watch the king manage the ordinary business of the realm. It was, ostensibly, a test of political attention. Aveline knew better. She had transcribed council sessions for a year. She knew which men leaned toward the north, the lords, which had debts to the merchant guild, which spoke in support of Cassius when Cassius was in the room and in caution when he was not. She watched Calen work, not his face, his hands, the way he shifted a document a quarter turn before he answered it, the way he laid his palm flat on the table when he was about to say no, the way his index finger tapped the edge of a page when he was preparing to give something ground he did not, in fact, intend to give. She had catalogued these gestures from below for a year. From above they looked different, as though the change of angle had stripped away a protective layer she had not known was there. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the set of his jaw, and she understood that he was not merely conducting business. He was steering toward something, not away from Cassius, but Cassius, piece by piece, session by session. He had been persevering for. He looked up. Their eyes met across the vaulted chamber, and she saw him see her seeing him, and the corner of his mouth lifted, once, small, only for her. She did not smile back. She could not, but she inclined her head, and she saw the answering ease in his shoulders, as though her one small nod had lifted a weight he had been carrying for the entire session. That evening a scented card was slipped under the door of her quarters. She did not open her door until the messenger had gone. She picked up the card, cream paper, simple wax. The Draven wolf pressed into the seal. No name. Ride tomorrow. With me, not the arena. The northern paddock. First bell afternoon. She turned the card over. On the back a single line in a different hand, rougher, older, familiar as the smell of rosemary. You may say no, my lady, but he hopes you will not, Sir Godfrey. She sat on the edge of her bed. She read the two hands 3 times, and then she went to sleep. For the first time in 3 nights, because someone had asked her something small, and she had permission to answer it. The 4th day, the riding demonstration in the arena was a spectacle. Silk saddles, ribbons braided into manes, 14 candidates displaying skill on the king's own mounts. Aveline did not attend the demonstration. She had left the arena early, on a plain palfrey. With Sir Godfrey riding 2 lengths behind her, Calen was already at the northern paddock, alone, in riding leathers, no circlet, no cloak. His chestnut hair tied back with a plain leather thong. She dismounted. He held her horse. You came, I came. You did not have to, I know. He looped the reins over the paddock rail. He did not turn back to her at once. He stood at the fence with his hand on the wood, looking out over the western pasture, where the mist was still lifting off the grass. My mother used to ride here. I did not know that. She did not enjoy the court. She rode every morning, whatever the weather. She said the palace suited her only when she could see it from a distance. You loved her, I did. She died when I was 11. She was 34 years old. She was, as this court remembered her, an inconvenient queen, because she had opinions, and she used them. Why are you telling me this? He turned. He looked at her, and in the mist and the pale morning light, the sharpness between them was not a knife. It was a window, because you asked me last night whether I understood what I was asking of you, and I did not answer well. So I am answering now. My mother married my father in the 14th year of his reign. She was born the daughter of a shipwright. There was no lineage, there was no bloodline, there was only the fact that he saw her and she saw him. And the court is resentful of that particular arrangement for 30 years. So I am to be another inconvenient queen. You are to be a queen, if you wish. Inconvenience is optional. It is only guaranteed by the men who prefer their queens quiet. She looked away, across the pasture, where the mist was thinning under a low sun. I have found things. Since we last spoke, I hoped you would. In the archive, I know you knew I would look. I hoped. 14 months of hoping, 14 months of steering. Which is not the same thing. Because a man who steers still leaves the wheel free when the tide requires it. She almost smiled at that. She did not. She was not ready. I need 3 days more. To finish reading, to finish comparing, to finish. Take them. You may not like what I bring. I already do not like it. I am only waiting for you to bring it. She turned to him. She was closer than she had realized, and the smell of him was pine and stone, and the bright thread body kept identifying as the bond. And she had not permitted herself to look at his mouth in this life, and now she did once. For less than a heartbeat. Do not kiss me. I was not going to. Today, do not kiss me any day, until I say agreed. That is what I need. That is what you have. She stepped back. She took the reins from him. She mounted. She did not look back as she rode out of the paddock, which was a kind of look in itself. And they both knew it, and Sir Godfrey, riding 2 lengths behind her, said nothing at all, which was his particular way of saying everything. The 5th day, the archive kept its secrets in silence, but it did not keep them from a scribe. Aveline spent the morning cross-referencing 3 volumes tax records with the property schedule she had copied. By the noon bell, she had a second document, a ledger of transfers. In the fiscal year following her father's conviction, the Blackthorn estate had absorbed lands from 4 other convicted houses. All 4 convictions had been supervised by Aldrich Blackthorn. All 4 estates had been sold at auction. All 4 had been purchased through the same intermediary, a wool merchant who had held no wool, and who had, in the year of his most active purchasing, employed a single clerk, whose signature appeared, in a slightly different hand, on the deeds, Cassius Blackthorn, at the age of 19. Before he had entered court service, she copied every deed. She built a second table. She bound the second document with a green ribbon. She locked it in the desk beside the first. Then Cassius came for her. He caught her in the corridor outside the archive. His timing was neat. He had waited until she was alone, until the guard at the far end had turned to change torches, until Marguerite had been sent to the eastern wing on an errand that Aveline suddenly understood he had invented. A moment, Miss Ashford. She stopped. Her voice was even. Chief Steward, you have been spending a great deal of time in the archive. In the last 2 nights, I have work to complete on the ledger of restored monastery lands. As you asked, I did not ask for that until this morning. You mentioned it 3 weeks ago. I began the work then, he smiled. His amber eyes did not smile. You are careful. I am a scribe. You are more than that. As I have come to appreciate, he stepped closer. The corridor smelled of old smoke. She could see the fine grain of his black gloves, the small gold ring on his little finger, a crest, a briar wound around the tower. Blackthorn, I have prepared a formal objection to your inclusion in the selection. It is drafted. It is witnessed. It will be presented to the king at the opening of the choosing ceremony. Unless you withdraw, tonight, in writing. In which case the objection will remain in my desk and your position in the records hall will continue, uninterrupted, as will your quiet life. Which is, I have observed, the life you have chosen. She held his gaze. And why would you offer me that, Chief Steward? Because I am a practical man. And because the alternative is unpleasant. For you, for the crown. For those who have taken an interest in your welfare, Sir Godfrey, among others, you would move against a knight of the household guard. I would advise the king to reassess a knight whose loyalties may have become confused. I would not move. As I would advise, that is a distinction without a difference. It is the distinction that separates a chief steward from a criminal, Miss Ashford. I would recommend that you learn it. She let a beat pass. She let him see her think. She let him believe he was reading her. I will consider your offer. Consider quickly. The ceremony is in 2 days. I will give you my answer tomorrow evening. By what hour? 6th bell. By 6th bell. In writing. Delivered to my desk. If it does not arrive, I will assume you have chosen to be present at the ceremony, in which case my objection will be read. He bowed. He walked away. His boots made no sound on the stone. Aveline stood in the corridor. Her wrists were steady. She counted them steady in her head as though counting were a spell, because he had said Sir Godfrey's name. Because he had said among others, which meant Marguerite, which meant her mother. Except her mother was dead, was she? Aveline had said the words her mother had disappeared her entire life. She had not said her mother had died, because no one had ever brought her a body. Because the last anyone had seen of Isadora Ashford was on the road to the southern border with a boy of 5 holding her hand. Because the record of their arrival at any monastery, any household, any refuge, had never been found. Because Aveline had assumed. for 17 years, that the absence of news meant the worst news, she had assumed, which was, she now understood, not the same as knowing. She went to the records hall. She sat at her desk. She did not open the drawer. She did not touch her pen. She stared at the wall for a full quarter of an hour, then she rose. She walked to the guard station at the corner of the west stair. Sir Godfrey was there, reading a report by the light of a small brass lamp. He looked up. He threatened you. How did you know? I know the sound of the chief steward's boots leaving a corridor with something accomplished. What did he offer withdrawal? In writing? Or an objection at the ceremony? And he named you. He named among others. He knows about Marguerite. He does. He may know about my mother. Sir Godfrey closed the report. He set it down. He rose from his stool. He looked at her the way a knight looks at a commander before a difficult ride, my lady. There is something else I have not told you, because I did not know it until this evening, because the message came this evening. From the man I asked 4 months ago to search the border villages. Say it. Your mother is alive. The room did not tilt. It shattered, and Aveline had to catch the edge of the guard table with both hands to remain standing. Because there was no floor. Because there was only the ringing in her ears and the hammering in her chest and one word turning inside her head. Alive, where? On the Blackthorn estate. In the western wing of the manor house. Under the care of a woman who is paid by the Blackthorn steward. Your brother is with her. He is 22. His name is Thomas. He has never left the manor. 17 years, 17 years. Why? Because your mother knew something. Because your father told her. In a letter she never delivered. Because Aldrich Blackthorn could not risk her testimony, and could not stomach killing her. Because he was, in his own way, a coward, and Cassius has kept her, as leverage, against a day he did not expect would come. And which has now come. Which day? The day Sir Draven King says her daughter's name in front of his court. She sat down on the stool. She put her elbows on the guard table. She pressed her hands against her face. She did not cry. She had cried her allotment for the week already. She was empty of tears and full of fire, and she looked at Sir Godfrey through her fingers. He will kill them. If he thinks he is losing, he may. Then we do not let him think he is losing until they are safe. Yes, my lady, you will bring this to the king. Tonight, I already have. My rider left an hour ago. His Majesty has been informed, then Caelan knows, and has, I believe, already sent men to the manor, quietly, by the mountain road. They will arrive tomorrow night. The ceremony is the following morning. Yes. She lowered her hands. So I write my letter of withdrawal tomorrow by 6th bell, and I deliver it to Cassius, and he believes he has won, and he does nothing to the manor, because he does not need to, because he thinks I have folded. Yes, my lady, and I attend the ceremony anyway. Yes, and I stand at the end of the line in my grey bodice, and he sees me, and he understands that I have lied to him, and he understands too late, because by then the king will already have my mother and my brother in his hall, yes. And he will speak, and he will read his objection, and the king will answer, yes, and I will be there. When he answers, yes, she stood. Her fingers were sure. They had never stopped being sure. Because she had learned at 7 years old in a corridor much like this one, that a scribe's grip does not slip even when everything inside her is on fire. Because a scribe's hand is the only hand history will remember, and she intended at long last to write something history would have to hold. Sir Godfrey, my lady, when my mother reaches this palace, will you be the one to bring her to me? If you wish, I wish. Then I will. She returned to her desk. She lit a fresh candle. She drew a clean sheet of vellum from the top drawer. She uncapped her ink. She wrote a letter of withdrawal. In her most careful hand, with her most obedient phrasing, she addressed it to the chief steward. She sealed it. She set it aside. Then she opened the lower drawer. She took out the red ribbon document and the green ribbon document. She wrapped them in oilcloth. She wrote a third letter, this one shorter. To the king. She sealed that one too. She gave both bundles to Sir Godfrey on her way to bed, for the king. When he asks for them, he has already asked, my lady, then he will not have to ask again. She slept for 4 hours, which was, by the standards of the week, an eternity. She dreamed of her father's hand shaping the letter A, and of her mother's voice singing a lullaby in a language she had not thought about in 17 years, and of a small boy who did not know his sister's name. Standing at a window of a house that had once been theirs, watching for a rider on the mountain road the 6th day, Aveline delivered the withdrawal letter to Cassius by the 6th bell. She placed it in his hand herself. She watched his amber eyes lower over the woods. She watched the corner of his mouth lift. She watched him fold the letter and slide it into his inner pocket. And she watched him not quite look at her. Because he had already stopped looking at her, Miss Ashford, chief steward, a wise choice. It is the choice I have made. You will not be forgotten. There will be a stipend. That is generous. You have earned it. She inclined her head. She left his office. She walked down the corridor without hurrying. She turned the corner. She descended the west stair. She reached the records hall. She sat at her desk. She uncapped her ink. She began work on a new page of the monastery ledger. Because that's works that had to be done, and because a scribe's hands cannot be idle. Even when they are waiting for the sun to rise on the last morning. Marguerite came in at the second bell. He looks pleased with himself. He should. He has won? You lied, I lied. Good. Tomorrow will be difficult. Marguerite, I know. There is a chance I will not be here for the 7th bell tomorrow evening. I know that too. If I am not, you will be. But if you are not, I will keep your desk, and I will move it to the window, and I will curse your name for 3 years for making me a promise you did not keep, and then I will forgive you. Because it is what we do. Aveline set down her pen. She reached across the space between the desks. She took Marguerite's hand. It was warm, and it smelled of ink and bread and the lavender she kept in her drawer. Thank you, not yet. Thank me tomorrow. When it is over, Aveline nodded. She released her friend's hand. She went back to work, somewhere on a mountain road. 22 riders were moving under a low autumn moon. Somewhere in a western wing of a manor that had once been Ashford land, a woman was sitting up in bed at the sound of hoofbeats. Somewhere in the king's private chamber, a young man in a plain linen shirt was reading a red ribbon document by candlelight, and under it a green ribbon document, and under that a letter in the careful hand of a scribe who had, at long last, permitted herself to write her own name at the top of a page that mattered. He read to the end. He set the pages down. He pressed his palm flat against the top page. He held it there, as though the page were a wound he was trying to close, or a truth he was trying to keep from taking flight. And then, because he was a king, and because he had been waiting for this hour for 14 months, he rose, and he called for his cloak, and he went to speak with his captain. The 7th day would begin in 5 hours. The 7th day rose grey, a low, careful grey, the kind of grey that has not decided yet whether to be rain or clearance. Aveline, dressed in the half-dark, she did not choose a gown. She had no gown. She wore what she had worn on every ordinary morning of the past 14 months. Dove grey bodice, cream blouse, slate skirt, belt with a small silver buckle her father had given her on her 6th birthday, which she kept in a wooden box for 17 years, and which she had put on this morning without ceremony, because she wanted him with her. And this was the piece of him she could carry. She pinned her light auburn hair the way she always pinned it, half gathered, the rest loose. Her mother had pinned her own hair the same way. That was something Aveline knew from a single miniature portrait she had kept folded inside her prayer book for 17 years, a likeness the size of her thumbnail, which had faded almost to a suggestion of a woman, but whose mouth Aveline had studied often enough to remember when her own smiled. Margaret came to her door with the sunrise. She carried 2 cups of broth. She set them both down on the small table. She did not speak. There was nothing left to say that would not spend a promise before it had been earned. She hugged Aveline once, hard. Then she stepped back. She looked at her, chin up. I've seen you carry heavier days than this and less prepared. Have you? Yesterday, Aveline laughed, small, bright, almost against her will. And that laugh was, later, the thing she remembered most clearly of that morning, because it was the first sound of her new life, and it had come to her in a plain room, from a friend. Before Auntie King had spoken, she walked to the great hall alone. The hall blazed. Torches banked at every column. Candles in tall iron trees flanking the dais. The vaulted ceiling caught the light and threw it back in warm gold. Every noble in the lowlands had come. The tapestries had been changed for the occasion. New green banners, new silver wolves, new heraldry announcing a new reign of a young king whose choice today would set the tone of the next 20 years. Aveline took her place at the end of the candidate's arc. The Viscount's daughter beside her did not edge away this time. She glanced at Aveline, she looked forward again. But she did not edge away, which was, in the language of a room like this, a decision. Cassius stood at the base of the dais, immaculate, composed, his silver chain a deliberate weight on his shoulders, his black gloves folded, a rolled parchment tucked under his arm. He did not look at Aveline, which was itself a message, because a chief steward who has won does not need to look at the woman he has beaten. He needs only to wait for the beat of the drums. Kalen entered from the side dais. He wore the formal doublet, deep forest leather, silver wolf head buttons, the dark cloak lined with grey fur, the silver circlet on his brow. He looked for the first time in 7 days like the king the court expected, which was, Aveline understood, a costume he had put on deliberately, because he wanted the men in this room to look at him as king. Before he asked them to look at him as anything else, he took the high seat, the hall quieted, which was a quiet that had been rehearsed over centuries, the kind of quiet only a great hall knows how to hold. Cassius stepped forward. He unrolled the parchment. His voice carried without effort, "Your Majesty, before the choosing begins, I must present on behalf of this office and this court a formal objection to the eligibility of one of the candidates whose name appears in your registry." Aveline held her hands at her waist. She did not move. She had told herself she would be still. She was still. Miss Aveline Ashford was added to this selection by royal command. I do not dispute your Majesty's authority to command, however. The records of the High Court, as this court still remembers them, show that House Ashford was stripped of its nobility 17 years ago, on charges of high treason, specifically the unauthorized transfer of military intelligence to a hostile border pack. Lord Alaric Ashford was convicted, imprisoned. He died in custody. The title was dissolved. The lands were seized. His heirs, insofar as any survived, hold no rank in this realm. He paused. Skilled speakers pause. To let weight settle, Miss Ashford is therefore, by legal definition, a commoner. Her inclusion in this selection is invalid. I respectfully recommend her name be struck from the registry. Before the choosing proceeds, the hall did not erupt. It made a sound closer to a held breath, a collective inhale, the kind you hear before a stone drops into a well. Aveline felt every eye in the room settles on her. She did not lower her chin. She did not lift it. She kept it where it had been, level, the way her father had held his when he had walked past her 7-year-old self on the way to a cell. Level, because a level chin is how you tell a room that they do not yet own the story. Is that your formal objection? Kaelin's voice cut across the parchment. Quiet, clean, it is, your Majesty. Then I will answer it. He stood, he descended the days once, twice, 3 steps. His boots struck the stone in a steady rhythm the hall could feel in its ribs. He did not look at Cassius. He walked past the arc of candidates, past Isolde Ravencrest, who bowed her head to him a fraction more slowly than the rest, past the Viscount's daughter whose hand had begun to tremble. He stopped in the open space at the center of the hall, where every man in the room could see him, and where every man in the room was, at that moment, precisely who he wanted them to be. A witness, Cassius Blackthorne. You have served as chief steward of this court for 11 years. You were appointed by your predecessor, a man named Aldrich Blackthorne, who held this office for 23 years before you. Who was your uncle, who raised you from the age of 9 on the Blackthorne estate, who left you, upon his death, the entirety of his holdings. Cassius's expression did not change, which was its own kind of change, because until that moment he had been wearing the small, quiet smile of a man about to close a door. Now he was wearing nothing at all. That is correct, your Majesty. Aldrich Blackthorne was the senior court official who brought the treason charges against House Ashford. He compiled the evidence. He presented it to the High Court. He recommended the verdict. He supervised the seizure of the Ashford lands. He was, by every measure of law, the man responsible for that conviction. That is a matter of record, it is. And so is this. In the fiscal year following that conviction, 60% of the seized Ashford lands were purchased at auction, through an intermediary, a wool merchant, who held no wool, who employed a single clerk, whose signature appears in a hand only slightly disguised on the deeds of transfer. Kaelin turned toward the crowd. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. That clerk was Cassius Blackthorne, at the age of 19, before he entered court service. Under my father's reign, the held breath in the hall released, not into words, into a sound like wind through a stand of dry reeds, 100 small movements, 100 faces turning to look at Cassius, 100 faces turning back to the king. Aveline watched Cassius's amber eyes. She watched them try for a moment to hold their shape. And then, not, your Majesty. This is a matter for the treasury, not for a choosing ceremony. If there is an accounting to be made, I will make it. There is more. Kaelin turned back to face him. The military intelligence Lord Alaric Ashford allegedly transferred consisted of patrol rotation schedules that were already public knowledge, posted at every gate on the southern border. The witness testimony was provided by 2 men in Aldrich Blackthorne's direct employ, one of whom recanted 6 weeks before his own death, in a document filed at a border monastery, and ignored. The confession itself was written on cheap monastery paper, in a hand that any trained scribe can identify as a forgery. He paused. He looked at Aveline once, Not quite a full breath in a trained scribe, Aveline felt the weight of every eye shift to her, and then shift back to Kaelin, which was, she had understood the moment her name changed, not by decree, by ordinary recognition. A room deciding all at once what it now believed. I have spent 14 months reviewing the Ashford case, not because it was brought to my attention, because a knight of my father's household guard came to me on the day I took the throne, and placed a letter in my hand, written by Lord Alaric Ashford, on the day he died, which named the man who had ruined him, and named that man's chosen heir, and asked me, in the very last words he ever wrote, to see that his children lived. The hall was silent now in a way that felt physical, as though the air had been drawn out of it. Only the small hiss of torches remained. The treason charges against House Ashford were fabricated. The evidence was forged. The conviction was secured by a corrupt official for personal financial gain. I have signed an order reversing the verdict. Effective this hour, the Ashford title is restored. The seized lands will be returned to Lady Aveline Ashford and to her mother. And to her brother the silence broke. Cassius took a step back. His silver chain caught the light and threw it in a small nervous flash across the flagstones. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You cannot spot, Majesty. The High Court I have. The High Court will convene a review. It will, and when it does, it will find that its steward advised it for 17 years from the seat of a house that was built on a lie. It will find that the same steward passed his lie to his nephew, who kept it, who fed it, who, when its cover began to fray, held 2 innocent people in a western wing of a manor as collateral against a day he did not expect would come, and which has now come. Kaelin turned toward the doors at the back of the hall. He raised one hand, and the great doors opened. 12 of the king's guard entered, in full mail, their surcoats bright with the draven wolf. In their midst walked a woman, 50 years old, thin from years of being fed lesser than she needed, hair the color of old iron, held back with a plain wooden pin. Her gown had once been fine. It had been mended many times. She wore no jewels. She wore no chain. She walked as though she had forgotten how a great hall was supposed to feel under her feet and was learning it again in real time. Beside her walked a young man of 22, tall, thin, chestnut hair worn long over a plain linen collar. He held his mother's hand, not because she needed him to, because he did. His eyes moved across the hall like a boy in a book. He had only read the first chapter of Aveline saw them, and she made a sound she had never made in her life. A small broken sound. Almost a laugh, almost a sob, and her legs took her 3 steps out of the arc before her mind caught up with them, and then 5 more, because she was running in a great hall, in front of every noble in the lowlands in her plain grey bodice, her hair unmoving, her hands out. Isadora Ashford saw her daughter, and her free hand rose to her mouth, and the hall watched a woman recognize a face she had last seen at the height of a 7-year-old's cheek, and the hall watched her whisper a single word that carried in the vaulted silence. Aveline. They met near the center of the room, not gracefully. There was no graceful way. Aveline reached her mother first, and her mother's arms went around her, and Aveline pressed her forehead into her mother's shoulder, and her mother smelled of soap and dust, and something Aveline had not known she remembered, the particular scent of the small cedar chest in a nursery that no longer existed, and Aveline felt her brother's hand touch her back, uncertain, then steady, and she reached one arm out and pulled him in, 3 of them, in the middle of a great hall, in front of a court that had until this hour believed only one of them was real. Isadora's voice was rough with disuse, rough with tears. You grew up, I had to. You look like your father, I know. I have been telling your brother about him, every day, so he would know when he met him, mother. Father, I know. My love, I know. He wrote me a letter, on the day. He asked me to be brave for the 2 of you. I have been trying every day. For 17 years, Aveline felt her brother's shoulders shake once. She did not look at him. She held them both. She let them hold her. She let a hall of nobles watch 3 Ashfords stand together for the first time since the world had told them they were no longer a family. She did not cry. She was again empty of tears. She was full of something else, something quieter than joy, something older, the steady, warm certainty of a door closing, not the door of a cell, the door of a story, a door that had been open on a draft for 17 years, and which at last could be shut, so that a new door could be opened. On the far side of the room, she lifted her head. She looked at Kaelin. He had not moved from the center of the hall. He was standing very still, his hands at his sides, his grey eyes on her, and in his face. For the first time in the 7 days she had known him properly, there was nothing kingly at all. There was only a young man who had, at long last, been able to give a woman he loved a thing she had needed more than she had needed him. She released her mother. Gently she turned. She walked across the last of the stone that separate her from him. She stopped one step away. You did all of this. You did most of it. If you freed them, I sent men. You gave me a reason to send them. You waited 14 months. I waited 17 years. You did not know me for 16 of them. I knew someone was owed a hearing. I have been raised to know when a hearing is owed, that is not a good enough answer. It is the answer I have. Until you ask me a better question. She held his gaze. Aveline Ashford. I have reviewed every candidate in this selection. I have considered the political advantages, the bloodline requirements, the expectations of this court, and the wishes of my own counsel. I have set them aside, because they do not answer the question that matters. And what is the question? Whether you will have me? Her throat closed. Because that was not a question a king was supposed to ask. Not in this hall. Not with a court watching. Not without a formulaic prelude and a formal register and the dry safety of ceremony. That was a question a man asked a woman on a plain morning, with nothing to protect either of them. Ask me again, later. Where no one else can hear, I will. And then I will answer. That is what I hoped. She lifted her hand. She placed it on his cheek, once. Briefly, in front of the whole court. Not a promise, a yes to the question of whether the promise could exist. Then she turned to face the hall. Add me. The words carried. Because she had been trained in a records hall to make her voice reach the far end of a chamber without shouting. Add me. Because he's asked. Because I have chosen. And because there is a name at the top of this court that has, for 17 years, been carried by 3 people who were told they no longer had the right to hold it. She looked at her mother. She looked at her brother. She looked at Sir Godfrey Hale, who had come to stand at the base of the dais with his hand on his sword and his eyes suspiciously wet. She looked at Marguerite, who was pressed against the service entrance with both hands over her mouth. She looked at Isolde Ravencrest, who was watching from the head of the candidate's arc and who was unmistakably smiling. My name is Aveline Ashford, and I have work to do? The hall did erupt then, not in scandal, in something closer to a released tide. Applause began somewhere near the back, uncertain at first, then steady, then loud. It swept up the arc of candidates, across the floor of the great hall, up the columns, into the vaulted ceiling, where it made a sound like a wind pushing at a door that had been stuck for a very long time, and which had at last come open. Kaelin took her hand. He kissed the insignia at the base of her thumb, which was, she understood, his way of asking the question one more time in the language they had built together. She did not answer with words. She lifted his hand and pressed it briefly to her mouth in return, which was, in the language they had built, a yes. Cassius Blackthorne was escorted from the hall by the king's guard. His silver chain of office was removed from his neck at the door. He did not speak. His amber eyes found Aveline as he passed. She met them. She did not look away. She held them until his boots crossed the threshold, and then she permitted herself, for the first time in her life, to be the one who watched a man walk away. He would face the High Court within the fortnight. His holdings, all of them, would be placed under Crown administration pending trial. His household would be dismissed. His uncle's grave in the family chapel at the Blackthorne estate would be exhumed and re-examined for records reportedly buried with him. The proceedings would be public. Every witness, every ledger, every rider on the mountain road would be called. There would be no shadows to hide in this time, because a scribe had already lit the corridor, and a king had already decided the lamps were staying on. Isolde Ravencrest came to her in the corridor after the formal proceedings had ended. Her emerald gown was still immaculate, her golden hair still precise. She looked at Aveline with the same clean assessing eyes she had turned on her in a garden of rosemary 6 days before. You knew, I suspected. Then I was certain. When did you become certain? The morning of the garden. When you told me to stay away from you kindly, I did not intend for you to hear it as a certainty. You did not have to intend. I have been reading Powerful People since I was 9. I know what a warning sounds like when it is also a confession. Isolde, yes, thank you. For the petition your father did not sign, you are welcome. For all the small things you will not know I did. Which is most of them. She turned to go. She paused. She looked back. Be a good queen, and do not, under any circumstance, be a quiet one. Your mother-in-law was not. It is why we still remember her. It is why you have a chance to be remembered too. Not for whom you married, for what you did while you were there. She walked on. Aveline stood in the corridor. Her mother was waiting at the far end. Sir Godfrey had taken Thomas to the eastern wing to find him rooms and clothes. and the first hot bath in a house that was at last willing to be his. Marguerite had returned to the records hall to prepare the ledgers for the announcement that would be posted in every town square in the lowlands by nightfall. Aveline walked to her mother. Isadora looked up. Her weathered face lifted into a smile. You did it. Kaelan did it. You did it. He only signed the order. That is the same thing. It is not. And you know it is not. A man who signs an order is not the same as a woman who put the order on his desk. Aveline took her mother's arm. They walked slowly down the corridor to a settlement in the eastern wing that had, that morning, been given the name Ashford again on their doors. Mother, yes, I do not know how to be a queen. No one does. You will learn. As I learned to be the wife of a border officer, as my mother learned to keep a household, as Kaelan is learning to be a king who is not his father, you learn by doing the next small thing and the next, until one day you look up, and the small things have become a life. That is what father used to say. That is where I heard it. They reached the door of her mother's rooms. Isadora paused with her hand on the wood. Aveline, yes, he is a good man, I know. Your father would have approved. I know that too. Good. Isadora went inside. Aveline stood in the corridor a moment longer. Then she turned and she walked back to the records hall. Because there was still, in the middle of everything, a monastery ledger that needed finishing, and because it was Wednesday, and on Wednesdays she worked. 3 months later, the records hall smelled the same: old paper, binding glue, iron tang. The arched windows caught the late autumn light and turned the flagstones to old honey. Marguerite had at last moved her desk. She had at last taken the window. She did not mention that she had moved it. She simply sat at it every day, and made a small show of not looking at Aveline, and made a smaller show of watching, in the reflection in her small brass hand mirror. Whenever the corridor delivered a set of footsteps she now recognized without effort, Aveline sat at her old desk, a new leather-bound ledger open in front of her, its cover stamped in silver, the Draven wolf on the spine. Beside the wolf, in smaller silver, an Ashford briar, which the Guild of Engraver had produced at the king's request, because the two houses were now formally joined, and because the king had insisted that both marks appear on every restored deed that came through this hall. Not out of romance, out of accuracy, she was writing the last entry. The ledger was called the Ledger of Restored Houses. It contained in her hand the corrections to 17 years of court records, every seized estate that had been unlawfully absorbed by the Blackthorn holdings, every widow whose pension had been quietly stopped, every son who had, on paper, been declared without inheritance. She had spent 3 months writing them back into existence, one name at a time, one deed at a time, one quiet, precise restoration at a time, because that was the work, and because no proclamation, no royal decree, no ceremony in a great hall could substitute for the patient act of a scribe recording in ink what should always have been true. Today she wrote the final entry, not the reversal of the seizure. That had been the first entry, 2 months ago, in its own way harder to write than any other, because it required her to put down, in her own hand, the words that severed the last cord tying her father's name to the charge that had killed him. Today's entry was simpler, and in another way larger. Alaric Ashford, formal correction of court record, all references to treason struck, signature confirmed authentic on all extant documents predating imprisonment, character restored, rank of honor conferred posthumously, household guard of the Draven line to bear his crest on ceremonial occasions, effective this date. She set down her pen. She closed the ledger. She rested her hand on the cove for a moment, long enough to feel the raised silver of the wolf and the briar under her palm. Footsteps in the corridor. Kaelan leaned in the doorway. He was in his shirt sleeves, his hair unbound, his circlet absent, his green doublet slung over one arm. Still here, still here. He crossed the room. He sat in Marguerite's old chair, which Marguerite, without turning around, had begun to leave conspicuously unoccupied at this hour of the day. He looked at the ledger. You finished, I finished. Show me. She turned the ledger toward him. He read the final entry. His thumb traced a slow, small circle on the back of her hand while he read, which was a gesture he had begun 3 months ago, and which he had not in any evening since forgotten to make. It is good, it is only a correction. No, it is the truth. Written down, she closed the ledger. She wove her fingers into his. She did not speak for a while, neither did he. The light in the rec hall shifted from gold to amber. Somewhere in the eastern wing, Isadora Ashford was arranging a small garden in the courtyard the king had given her as her private chamber. She had planted rosemary along one wall, because it was the smell she remembered from her own mother's garden, and because a house begins with a smell, Somewhere on the mountain road, Thomas Ashford was riding out with two of Sir Godfrey's men. To learn the country he had never seen, he wrote to his sister every week. His hand was clumsy, he was practicing. Aveline had sent him her father's old prayer book. She had told him not to imitate, only to notice. What his blood already knew, Sir Godfrey had been made captain of the Queen's Guard. He had accepted the post with the gravity of a knight receiving a sword, and then he had asked for one favor. That his first standing order be to sit every evening at the guard station at the corner of the west stair, where the light was good, and where he could see the door of the records hall. Because habits, he had said, are how old men keep their promises. Kaelin lifted her hand to his mouth. He kissed the ink stain at the base of her thumb. He kissed the callus where her pen rested. He kissed each of the small marks on her fingers that the past 3 months had not been able to wash away. Because a scribe's hands do not come clean, and a scribe's hands are a record of the work. Add her, he murmured against her palm, because it had become a joke between them, and also because it was at bottom the truest thing he knew how to say. The line that had begun as a command had become a request and had settled in the end into a plain daily fact. Add me, she answered, which was her way of saying, still here, and still choosing, and still yours. Every day, he rose. She rose with him. She set the ledger on the top shelf beside her father's old prayer book, which she had at last permitted herself to keep in view. She capped the ink, she closed the drawer, she took his hand. They walked out of the records hall together down the corridor, past the guard station at the west stair, where Sir Godfrey was reading a report by the light of a small brass lamp. He looked up. He nodded. He did not rise. That was the shape their courtesy had settled into now. Not because rank had softened, because trust had. The door of the records hall closed behind them. Now before we walk away from this hall, let us stop for a moment, because the pen has been busy and the great matters have been settled, and that is where most stories end. But this story, if it is going to be worth the telling, needs to sit with us a little longer, because how many good men have been buried under lies while the world moved on? How many fathers have died in cells they should never have been in, waiting for a word of honor that never came? How many daughters' sons have been made small by a charge their father never earned, and told, by a court that should have known better, that the smallness was theirs to inherit? There is a lesson here. There are 3, and they belong to anyone who has ever carried a name against the weather. The first is about the endurance of a good name. A name is not the last thing a man leaves behind. His name is only the shape of what he did. What he leaves behind is the memory of a child who noticed, the steady loyalty of an old soldier who did not forget, the quiet skill of a friend who watched a window for 14 months without asking to be seen. Alaric Ashford was buried in an unmarked cell, but he was not buried at all. Because a knight remembered him. Because a daughter recognized his handwriting from a prayer book she had carried for 17 years. Because a young king, on the day he took the throne, chose to read a letter instead of file it. A good name will outlast the men who tried to erase it. If there is even one person left who is willing to look, the second is about the patience of the truth. 17 years is a long time. A man can build a house on a lie in 17 years. He can raise a nephew on it. He can convince a court that the lie has become the law. But a lie is not the law. A lie is only a lie that has not yet met the person who is willing to check its work. Truth waits. It does not hurry. It does not shout. It does not demand. It sits at the bottom of a locked box in the back of a records hall. It waits for a scribe with no reason left to be afraid, and when she opens the box at last it is exactly where it was left. It has been waiting for her. And it has been waiting patiently, and that patience is not weakness. It is the deepest strength there is. The third is about the value of small work. Aveline Ashford was a scribe. Not a knight, not a spy, not a general. She wrote things down. She copied documents. She noticed inconsistencies in letters. She kept a prayer book with her father's signature on the flyleaf for 17 years. That was all, and yet without that small work done every day, without ceremony, without applause, the story on which the entire Draven court now rests would still be a story of a treasonous family, an inconvenient scribe, and a chief steward calmly poisoning the archive from within. The men who write history think they write it. They do not. They only put their names on the top of the page. The story is written by the people who kept the receipts, who showed up, who did the small work every day, until at last the small work added up to a whole life, and that life turned out to be a country. So if you are, tonight, doing small work, if you are keeping the receipts of your family's honor, if you are showing up to a job that no one thanks you for, if you are watching a window for someone who does not yet know your name, Do not stop. That work is the country, and the men who forget it rarely inherit it long. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many honorable men in our own lives have been buried under labels the world was too tired to check? How many fathers have died, still waiting to hear their names spoken with the respect they earned? How often we have accepted without asking twice the verdict of a room that did not do its homework? And how much of what we call justice is only patience, bearing witness, until a scribe with no reason left to be afraid opens the box? Friends, if you have ever fought a long, quiet fight to protect the name your father left you, if you have ever waited years for the truth to come out about something that mattered, if you have ever done the small work when no one was watching and wondered whether any of it counted, tell me about it in the comments below. Your story is somebody's letter tonight, somebody's Sir Godfrey in the corridor. Some say's proof that the hook on the letter A was always there. Somebody's reason to open the box, because a good name is not the loudest one in the room. It is only the one that was still there when the room went quiet, and which was carried in ordinary hands back into the light, and that is where we leave them. A king and his scribe, a mother in a garden of rosemary, a brother learning the roads of a country he was born to, an old knight at his lamp, a friend at a window, a ledger on a shelf, its ink dry, its truth at last on the page, the rest as it should be is theirs.